All right. Thanks for waiting, everybody. Let's get started. My name is Mark Walker. I'm the CEO of StrongPoint. And the reason we put on this webinar is we have a lot of questions from people in the Salesforce community about how you can use StrongPoint to manage technical debt. So we're going to walk through this, not doing a full demo of the StrongPoint platform at all. We're just going to skip across the top and talk about some of the problems we have with technical debt in Salesforce and some different strategies that you could employ to resolve those. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on PowerPoint. We're just going to use it to frame the discussion, and then we're going to sort of plunge in and look at some things in the interface itself. So when we're talking about technical debt, and I know the very fact that you guys are on this webinar means that you probably have a pretty good understanding of it. We're really talking about the additional costs of making new improvements in Salesforce to be responsive to our business stakeholders, where the cost of doing so is arising from the previous implementation decisions. The complexity of the account is the simple way of thinking about it. And the most extreme example of this, of course, is when you hit your field limits on an object and you can't add anything more to it. But there's obviously a lot of steps before that where there's a very significant amount of complexity. So we're going to talk about the causes of technical debt. We're going to talk about some of the strategies as I discussed it, and then talk about how automated documentation can be used to drive productivity despite technical debt, and then how we can use methodologies to safely clean up unused customizations and should we say unnecessary customizations, no longer necessary, no longer useful customizations, in order to free ourselves up in order to manage things more effectively. And then that we can also use capabilities to automate our change review. One of the challenges we get into is that as your technical debt goes up, the chances of breaking things goes up, and therefore the change management or change review process gets more complicated. And we're going to look at some strategies for maybe sorting the wheat from the chaff, so that the really important things go through rigorous review and less risky things go through no review, but maybe a lighter level review, and how we actually make sure that that's happening successfully. So where does technical debt come from, right? The main cause of technical debt is that the business's processes have actually changed over time. What was important 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago is not important now, and that therefore we have to adapt Salesforce to meet our current business needs. And in the course of doing that, it became either necessary or expedient to create new customization rather than reuse existing customization for all sorts of good reasons. But the change in your business, which is going to continue on forever, is the fundamental cause of most technical debt. It's not that something was a totally bad idea at the time. It's that it was a good idea at the time and it's not that useful now. When we're doing this, because of the exigencies of getting the result that the business needs, often what happens is we end up with short-term workarounds. So things that we don't have enough time or flexibility to be able to fully identify what the very good, or even visibility, it's a very good, very long-term approach would be. And so we just need to do something fairly quick right now to meet an immediate need. And so that can also cause technical debt, because in fact that's almost the classic definition of technical debt from a development sense, is when you do something that's expedient but is going to have negative repercussions further down the road. And certainly if we think about technical debt as a software company, that's really what we're talking about. We're thinking about the things that were developed in our code that are going to cause implications. But in Salesforce, these are usually quick workarounds that somebody did to solve an immediate business problem, and that workaround now becomes a dependency that we have to worry about later on. The third type is duplication of similar customization. So for all sorts of reasons, we can sometimes end up with multiple different things that are tracking the same thing, and those things are not interrelated, or they may be tracking very similar information. And this may be with lack of full visibility, and particularly with a lot of changeover and a lot of loss of trial knowledge that we get as teams are being changed over in this incredibly rapidly evolving Salesforce universe, we can end up with duplicate similar customizations. And those, again, they may be a subtype of the first short-term workaround, or they may in fact be just intended to be a long-term part of the system that we now need to maintain. The classic example of that being, you pick two pick lists that are actually representing the same data but on different objects. And you did a global pick list weren't available at the time this was created, and therefore you ended up with two different pick lists, and both of these need to be maintained. Core visibility is often at the root of a lot of this stuff. So if you had complete knowledge of everything, the decision might be different. So if you were able to very rapidly identify things that look very similar to what you're concerned about, you might be able to make better decisions about whether or not to do one of the short-term workaround, or to reuse something, or to unify it. And so it's not so much that the people probably on this call are necessarily individually making those errors. It's a team sport, right? And so we want to be able to make better decisions as a team, so better visibility is super important. And the other part of it, of course, that people often forget is a huge source of technical debt is actually valuable complexity. Actually valuable complexity that is driving value for the business that you definitely need to protect. So just because something's valuable doesn't mean it doesn't produce technical debt. It could be extremely valuable, extremely important, and in fact needs to be very tightly protected. And so that's an important thing. But what the technical debt comes from is not from the fact that it exists, but from the work required to protect it. And we want to get all the value out of it, but we want to reduce the work required to protect it as much as conceivably possible. And then the third one, I alluded to it briefly as we were passing by, but loss of tribal knowledge can also lead to technical debt. And again, the technical debt comes from when we lose members of our team who did know a lot about, for example, a particular part of our Salesforce or Force.com environments, our apps, that they're able to actually, those people were able to give good guidance in a change committee or a center of excellence review, and those people are no longer there. When we lose those people, and we don't have thorough documentation and really thorough processes for doing certain things, we actually incur technical debt, not from what was done, but from the knowledge we just lost. So you're probably thinking that there's other, thinking some of these or all of these apply to your organization, but there's also obviously other causes as well. Some of them, being just too much of whatever, the too many fields, too many reports is a huge cause as well. So in terms of strategies for managing technical debt, we really think of it as a progression. And the really good news is that to solve a lot of this and to get around these problems, you don't need to necessarily clean up the entire org to do it. And we're going to talk about org cleanup because it's obviously, in some cases, absolutely critical. If you've got an object that no longer has any available fields, if you use every single field you possibly have, you reached your limits, or if you're running into custom object limits and things like that, then cleanup becomes critical. And it's also a great idea. I mean, as the Navy says, a messy deck is a dangerous deck because you're going to trip over something, fall overboard, and die, right? Well, the same thing applies to business critical systems. And if you're on this call, you certainly consider your Salesforce or business critical systems, and certainly you would as well. So keeping things tidy as much as possible is a great discipline, but sometimes it's absolutely necessary. But in order to move forward, tomorrow, as long as you're going to clean up the entire org tomorrow, we're talking about, look at a bunch of different strategies that help us make good decisions now. And the first strategy we can take is automating documentation. So to be able to visualize dependencies and be able to reduce the time it takes in order to understand the complexity and make that as we'll see, make that documentation available in many, many different ways to solve different types of problems. So people can use it in very flexible ways. And of course, make it available as data in Salesforce so you can apply your Salesforce skills against it. So you can use it to monitor quality, you can use it to distribute work, you can use it to manage workflow around managing technical debt. It's not just about the dependencies, though. It's also about utilization and about organizational risk. So, not a classic example of this is that values in pick lists that are not actually being used, removing those is not as risky, obviously much less risky than removing pick list values that are being used, right? Obviously, that could potentially wipe out data. Similarly, most reports are not mission critical, but reports that are on dashboards are significantly more mission critical, and you would be concerned about that, right? And similarly, we can have list views, and many list views may not be that mission critical. We wouldn't want a complex change process, but list views that are part of profiles or in other ways parts of workflow can be extremely important as well. So we're looking not just at technical dependency, but we're looking also at organizational risk. What's being used, how often it's being used. In some cases, particularly through our integrations with Shield, for those of you who are using the Shield program, get extremely extensive information about who's using things. But even without that, we can get some, for the main things we'd be worried about usage, we can get some great information. The second strategy we want to do is automate risk decisioning. Because when we think about where a lot of the costs, the technical debt costing, there are some situations where you just can't go there because the way something was built is going to prevent you from moving forward. So you're going to have to figure a different way around it. But in many cases, what the bigger problem is that perfectly useful things that the business wants and would like to get implemented don't get through the change process because nobody ever is able to do the initial triage. And we want to push, because we don't have enough, first of all, there aren't enough Salesforce professionals in the entire world. And there certainly aren't enough in most organizations, right? So we've got a shortage of talent and experience across the entire ecosystem. And even in the very best managed companies, the professionals who are working are up to their ears in doing and improving and moving forward. So to the extent that we can automate the decisioning process to make that faster for SMEs in various different departments so they can get their answers super quickly, for admins and VAs who are working to support them, we want them to be able to do that risk analysis in seconds, not in days, not in weeks. And the classic example we hear from one customer is, why does it take me 2 weeks, or one customer said 2 months, to change a pick list? Well, the answer is, as we know, because the possible outcome of changing that pick list could be devastating. But not for every pick list. And if we can get that answer back super quickly, we can move more quickly. In addition to that, we want to automate impact analysis. So it's not just about risk analysis super quickly. When we do have to make decisions, when we are going to the Center of Excellence or the Change Review Committee, we do want to go there fully armed. And we want to go fully armed on an evidence basis, because when everybody knows that that the impact analysis was done rigorously, then people trust it. So one of our very large customers recently said, it's not that you get the change approved faster, it's that you got the change approved more reliably, right? So what they found is when they implemented StrongPoint, they started getting better questions from management, which caused better decisions to be made. And then over time, everybody loosened up and started to trust the system, and the changes got faster. But initially, it was better information. We'll show you how that works. And we're going to show you this inside Salesforce. So this is a native Salesforce application. It also works inside Jira and ServiceNow, and we are working with some customers to implement it inside cases so that you can push this decisioning out to the edges of, to the right place where your tickets come in, so that we can get back to people right away and say, yes, we can do that really quickly for you. No, that's going to take a long time, and this is why, right? So that that really fast decisioning. Now, I promise we talk about cleanup, but we will talk about cleanup but we need systematic cleanup. We need a process for performing cleanup and getting approvals to do cleanup in a way that makes sure that we have the right workflow. And the interesting thing about cleanup workflow is it runs backwards to the normal workflow. The normal workflow is somebody creates a ticket and that a need that they have, and that goes into the system, and that eventually goes through into our change review process. In cleanup, it's often going the other way around. The administrative team, the product owner team, the team that's managing Salesforce, is seeking to simplify the system as a best practice or to achieve another aim. So we need more room in this object to do X, and therefore we have to unpack all the things that touch it. And so it doesn't necessarily go through the normal workflow. But we're going to look at identifying unused customizations. We're going to see some examples where somebody is flagging that potentially we have unneeded customizations, like automation against things where the field itself, for example, has no data in it or hasn't had data in it for years. And then some types of cleanup, such as reports, we can completely automate that. We can automate the communication across the organization to say to people, hey, we're going to clean up these reports, we're archiving them, don't worry, we'll keep a record of what they used to be. So we're not going to lose the definition. If you want to go backwards, we can roll it back for you. But we're going to automate that entire work because that is so much work that the people would never get around to. But all administration teams get stressed by the fact that people are, can you help me find this report? Can you help me, do this report? And everybody strongly suspects that report already exists. Well, if we can clean up the things that aren't actually being used, we can get to a simpler system. And then we're also going to talk about automating change review and center of excellence. And as you can probably see from the story we told so far, if you have completely comprehensive documentation, you have automated risk and impact analysis assessment, and you're cleaning up things so that you are having the smallest number of things to analyze when you're making decisions, then you can actually start to route things to different forms of change review rather than having everything have to go through the center of excellence. And what this can do is it can say, these need to be, these touch scripting or automation or great critical objects, we need to fully think this through very carefully. These other things, we need to do this in the sandbox account. We're not allowed to do this in production for sure, but we can get very much lighter level of review before we release it. And what that can do is enable productivity. But if we're going to skip the full rigorous one where everybody chimes in, we really got to be sure that we understand what those risks are. So we'll talk about that as well. So let me start off with the documentation, right, at the beginning. And so this is a dependency relationship diagram in StrongPoint. And so, for example, if we were to go in and look at any of these fields, we can immediately see what level of complexity is going on. So we can immediately say, look, the company social media field, it has a few reports on it, it's appears in these layouts, but there's no scripting or workflows or any other complex automation running against this. We can immediately, if you had this interface, anybody in the organization or anybody on your team anyway, could very, very quickly go back to a business stakeholder and say, yeah, actually, we can actually change that pick list for you, no problem, right? We can look at other things and see, these are slightly more complicated because there's a few more reports, but we can also look at things where it doesn't require deep, extensive experience or expertise to see that changing this is a bad idea, right? Because immediately we can see that there's already scripting. And of course, the changes we're sometimes thinking about are not changes to, not just changes to the field itself, it's also the addition of additional functionality on top of this. This is going to become critical to lightning readiness, for example, where we're basically saying, okay, what exactly do we have touching this thing? Because if we know that, then we can actually say, yes, actually, we can actually plan that as being part of our Lightning migration, versus if we had other customizations, like, yeah, we're actually going to have to unpack those, or at least very carefully think this through. So what we want to do in this type of situation is take away the tribal knowledge part, because right now, all of you on the call are probably making the same decision about the riskiness of changing the maintenance type field, even though this is not your org, right? Because we've taken away the need to have prior knowledge and turned it into a need to be able to look at a very, very easily understood diagram. But the second thing is we just increase the speed massively, right? It's not that professionals can't run this stuff to ground. Obviously, everybody does, right? Because they run it to ground, and that's how we don't fry things most of the time, right? It's that the work required to do that in the cases where there wasn't a problem, or when there was a problem, I suppose, is disproportionate to the response time we're trying to give to the business. So we have these types of interfaces, they're super, super valuable. Now, in addition to that, I mean, this is obviously a DoD diagram, and you can get to it by navigating. And of course, you could be looking at standard fields as well. I just decided to show the custom fields on the account object. We could be looking at the standard fields as well, and looking at the impacts on those as well. And in fact, if you think about it, the standard field collisions are actually one of the things we'd be most concerned about on the account object in particular, because we often will see people wanting to say, oh, could I automate the completion of that in some way? And that would be potentially problematic. But we can also generate DRDs from searching. So for example, I can go in and search for the completed requests, the thing that we were just looking at. We just looked at the DRD and generated a DRD right away. Again, we're crazy obsessed with efficiency, right? So if you go back here, we could say, we know the API name because we're looking at it somewhere and we're trying to figure out what the heck that thing is, or we want to search by name, and we can generate the DRD right away. Or we could say, no, actually what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get to the actual customization record itself, and I want to subset this. So I want to search the metadata, and I just want to say, for example, I want to see that maintenance type custom field. I want to go and see if there's any other maintenance type. So I search for it and I say, oh, wait a second, right. There's two maintenance type fields, right? There's one on the account object and one on the repairs object. Now, I don't actually know anything about this account. I don't run this account. This isn't even a real account. It's a demo account with a whole bunch of things loaded into it. But I would strongly suspect there's a piece of code connecting these things, right? But if there weren't, if say, for example, there were two lists, the ability to search and identify that these two lists exist is probably pretty useful. And also the ability to search more globally is pretty useful. So the idea of documentation is partly that we would have DRD views that show us things like the interdependencies, but also that we can search for them, and we can search for them in a way that produces views like this, which we can export to Excel if we're walking to a meeting, so we can explain things. And then when we actually go down into, for example, one of these customizations, we can actually now drill into it and see a lot of information about it. So we can go in and say, okay, this is the maintenance type field, and of course we can see the DRD that we're looking at, but we don't need to navigate it. We can see a summary of all the dependencies, which is part of the metadata of the object, and we can drill in and see detailed metadata about when it was last used, for example. So you can see that, oh, this is being actively used, so yeah, we're super careful about this. And of course, all of this information is printable, exportable, searchable, reportable, and is going to become critical to our cleanup exercises. So one of the things I hate about webinars is I don't ever get to ask you guys about, did this make sense? Do you have any questions? We're going to have some questions at the end, and by all means, please do ask questions. I think there's always some questions coming in, and we'll have some time to do that. So there are many other aspects of the documentation system We've covered off the very big highlights. Key things to remember is you need systems built right into Salesforce so that you can use all your Salesforce skills against it to really make it super valuable. So the sort of problems you can solve with this are, in addition to the dependency problems, you can start to, what we're going to do is we can start using this information to automatically assess risk. So here's an example. We already looked at the company's social media field. This is an example of using an engine to surface a risk, or more to the point, to explain to somebody what the change process should be for changing something in this org. And in this case, somebody is looking to change the company's social media field, which, if you remember, we took a look at back here. It was this field here, which didn't have any large complexity to it. And we could have drilled into this, by the way, and said, okay, when was, oh, well, this was last used in 2017. So maybe we don't care about messing up this report. But what all somebody can do, either in Jira or ServiceNow or in a case or in a process issue, which is the generic ticket that comes with StrongPoint, because some customers don't want to use a case for triage. They want to use something that's not going to go into their support system. They want to use it something that doesn't go into there initially, and then move on to a change request or case later. They can simply fill out a form, specify what customization you're thinking of changing, and it says you're supposed to be doing sandbox development and testing. So we'll talk about how that's configured in a second. But what that means is what you're not doing is full software development lifecycle. So for sure, there are no technical dependencies on this. And for sure, this is not being flagged as being specially protected, such as in a way that requires very specialized approval. It's just you aren't allowed to change the data model in production because that's madness, right? You don't do that. You change the data model in, even if you think it's a good idea, you change the data model in Sandbox, but you can have a lighter change process because you don't have to do the whole regression testing, and therefore the change committee, the change process can be much smaller. It may not even go through the Center of Excellence because if the business wants it and we have an overall review process about these changes that we could talk about in aggregate, but we know that this is going to be a fairly fast change. By way of contrast, if somebody filed a ticket in Jira or ServiceNow or in a process issue record here, and they've specified the maintenance type field, so these are both the same type of object on the same type of field on the same object, right? And in this case, the maintenance type field, the system is automatically decisioning it and it's saying that requires a full software development lifecycle. And the reason is the system knows that it's got complex dependencies on it, and you're going to have to test it. And therefore, if you're trying to be responsive to a business owner in the system, getting that information in 2 seconds is very useful because you can say to the person, okay, so we're not going to be able to quickly do your customization or add customization that will impact the maintenance type field because it already has complex customization against it. So we'll have to do a regression test. So this is going to have to go through our full Center of Excellence review because when we have other scripting, we already know what there's some risk there. And this causes the business people, our business stakeholders, they're not unreasonable people. They're often under a lot of pressure, but if you can give them a reasoned answer in 2 seconds, that's better than giving a reasoned answer in 2 weeks, or as some customers have pointed out, not giving them a reasoned answer because you have so many things on your plate, you could never actually get to it. So this automated decisioning takes a lot of pressure off the admins and allows us to move in environments where we have technical debt still very, very quickly and be super responsive to our customers. Now, if we did have this sort of problem, we're going to want to move forward with a change request, and we're going to need approval. And your change process may, as we mentioned, work through Jira or work through ServiceNow or work through some other way, but we want to know the impact analysis super quickly. And this is the part where that very large customer pointed out that it was a tremendous relief to management and also, frankly, to the admins to be able to do this. I'm not going to teach you about how our change management process works in this case, because we're actually just talking about a particular aspect of it. But in this case, somebody has flagged that they're making some changes to the company social media field, the maintenance type field, and the California customers report, something that's really super safe to change. And obviously, this is not a real change, right? It's just being purely set up to show you the provenance of the decision making and how it advances. So we could have seen it in a DRD, and then we could have searched for it and seen more information, and then we could navigate the customization and see it, and then we could have automated risk analysis and decisioning at the ticket level. And now we're going through the change process. And what we're interested here is the ability to understand what the impact analysis is. So on the maintenance type field, remember the system was warning us that we had significant potential downstream risks. And we saw that when we were in the DRD, we saw that. But in this case, we don't have to go through the DRD. We can simply have the change request that specifies it and says, look, this is not safe to delete or modify. So really, really important to clean up later, but really important to any change, really. Right? And so there's a maintenance type field, and saying that, look, first of all, as you remember, we saw that the date last used on that was very recent. And there's dependent scripts, there's dependent workflows, and there's a dependent list view report that is being used, right? So therefore, from a management point of view, their first part of the question is answered. So great, so this is a dangerous thing to do. So they're saying, okay, what's your plan for addressing this? Well, for the admin, BA, or sometimes developer teams that need to actually bring forth the plan of how we're going to do this, having this information and the ability to dig into the metadata describing these things is gold, right? Because now we've got access to all the information we need to worry about in the change process, so we can go through and describe it. But for management, it's also gold, because they have a great deal of confidence that the impact analysis they're going to base a decision that has the potential to disrupt significant numbers of people if you mess it up is being done rigorously. And it's not that they don't think you're doing it rigorously now, but there's a huge difference between my professional opinion is this is thorough and I can back it up, and my professional opinion is this is thorough, particularly if you're trying to get the most efficiency and you have different people, or perhaps slightly different experience running this to ground. The experience level required to run this to ground when you already have the list, massively lower than the experience level trying to run to ground when you don't have it. And of course, the company social media field, which is much less risky, it's just giving us much lower risk. And of course, the California customers report, the one that wasn't risky at all, giving us no risk. Right? So we can get the payment out. So I'm not going to go through the whole thing. There's lots of other capabilities in our change management system, release and rollback, and authorize release and rollback, so you can't move forward without appropriate authorization. Lots of different capabilities. The key thing about this whole system is that you may very well want to start cleaning things up, right? We talked about cleanup. And so this is a simple view, and it's an example of using a list view to create workflow that we can then use to drive productivity in terms of cleanup. So this is what this is doing, is looking for any unused fields on the account object when we started looking at the account object. And most of the things there are being used, but these 5 things are not being used. And we can quickly identify them, and we can very, very quickly see whether there's any scripting or workflows or other things that would cause us concern about cleaning them up. And a really interesting thing comes out of this, right? So in this case, we have the customer priority and delivery status fields, and they haven't been used since since 2017 and 2018. And yet we can see that there's actually scripting run against this, and workflows and workflows and approvals, right? So when we're trying to think about how to make our system easier to understand, easier to manage, and easier to update, one really wonders what the heck those things are up to. Now, obviously, this is a demo account, right? So this is entirely possible in this account. But when we work with customers, customers find this all over the place. And so you're able to go through and find that there's things that are there that normally you might worry about and waste time trying to run to ground, but it actually turns out that they probably are not being used at all. The conditions that cause this to be triggered simply don't occur anymore because something is no longer getting populated. And of course, obviously, in many cases, the reason why this is all happening is that the field that was driving the trigger that would cause everything to happen isn't being populated anymore because it was a good idea at the time. We don't do that process anymore, and therefore when we clean it up, we can clean up not only the field but the related workflow and script. But obviously, these ones are going to be a little riskier to clean up than these ones, right? So here we have some things that are not being used at all, and it includes, order status, select package, and upsell opportunity. And these don't have any scripting or workflows or other complex dependencies against them, and therefore we're feeling pretty comfortable cleaning them up. And we can actually go right in this view and actually create a, if we have a cleanup process, we can organize our work. We can make notes about what we need to investigate for cleanup. We can set the status. So we can say, oh, actually, I think this needs to be under investigation, perhaps, or maybe this is to be cleaned up. And we can go through and go work in a very efficient way to build projects, cleanup projects. I'm not going to go through and fully describe what we believe the right way to use these different fields are. We have a guide to doing this. In fact, the new version of it's just about to come out, which will walk you through the best practices, including a whole bunch of very, very specific examples, like, how do you clean up things that have reference to people who may have left the building, and how do you clean up, how do you identify unused, whether a value in a list is being used anywhere, and things like that. So very, very specific cleanup examples. But the overall idea is that you can have a place to store your cleanup status in Salesforce so that you can actually run a process. And what you end up doing is you end up attaching things eventually onto change requests, and those change requests are cleanup change requests, but now they have the impact analysis, so that when everybody goes to clean it up, they're saying, okay, are we really sure that we don't care about these reports? And the short answer for most cases is that if the field hasn't been used, it's not whether the report is filtering on that field or whether it's just showing the field, it doesn't make any difference. The report's useless, right? And or it's either the report's useless or removing the field won't affect the quality of the report, because that column in the report was always empty anyway, right? So, but we don't have to always do that. We can always drill in and we can say, okay, well, are these being used? Could we go and find it? And in fact, you can even do this in a report. So we can actually, even if you have a lot to do, you can go through and do a double check to make sure that none of the reports that you're concerned about are being filtered. I'm just not showing you that view right now. So in this case, for cleanup, information is power, and a process that leads to a good result where you go from, I detected things I might want to clean up, I was able to vet them, to put them into different tracks. These are complex things, I'm going to deal with them in one way. These are not complex things, I'm going to deal with those in another way. I'm going to put these on my change request, and I'm going to move through the process. Now, the other way we can do this, we talk about making our own change process more efficient, is we can also use this to route things. So, for example, we can have different change requests, and we can see that at the ticket level, but we can also have different change requests that do need to get approved, that are sitting in different queues, and therefore can be distributed to different team members and subject to a different level of scrutiny. So in this case, these are obviously all just different examples, but these are just simply example change requests where the engine has decided that the level required is sandbox development and testing. And what that means is that it's just a flag. You still need a deployment record. You still want to record permission to deploy it, but you don't And different companies will do this in different ways. Maybe they'll do it that the initial approval might be in the Jira service now, and then just the deployment record exists in our system. It's still looking for a formal deployment because we don't want to make these changes in production without approval. But it's just signaling to everybody that the step you're going to skip is the detailed regression testing. Compared to this list of things, this is going to need detailed regression testing, which means it's going to take some of the most talented people we have in the organization, the really, really talented admins and very experienced admins and developers, functional sometimes, but often actual developers and code developers, and we're going to take them off moving forward to simply double check. And of course, knowing what you need to test can also simplify your regression testing as well, because if you know the dependencies, that can optimize that as well. But we're still going to have to do it, right? Because we really have to think this through, and that's going to slow things down. So if we know which bucket they're in, we could have things that just require business approval. For example, report changes, critical report changes, they require business approval. They do not require IT, a full IT change process. There could be things such as the changes, non-complicated data model changes or layout changes that don't have any profile or automation dependencies. Those things can be put through a lighter change cycle, and then more complex things go through a deeper change cycle. And for some of our customers, this is still the same group of people. It's just the same group of people where you're doing a lighter review of it because you already have the engine saying, this is not that complicated. You may still be sitting there going, is this a good idea? That's a different question. But what you're not doing is saying, okay, are we going to have time to do the regression against this? When can we schedule this? So the answer for the first group is probably pretty quickly. The answer for the second group is definitely not pretty quickly. And just knowing that allows you to run your change, your center of excellence or your change review board, whichever you call it, more efficiently. There's other capabilities in the system to be able to divide changes up. So you have, instead of having one change review board, you perhaps have multiple change review boards for things that are lighter, so they deal with different parts of the system, different apps, for example, maybe have their own review for things that are below a certain threshold. The point of it is it's Salesforce, so we can help you use it in the way that makes sense to your company and fits with your existing change policy. It doesn't have to be, you have to do it our way, you have to do it only the one way we do it. So the policies that do this, keep in mind time, the policies that do this are very easy to understand and configure. And we actually have a new version that's coming out fairly soon that's more granular than this, but many companies are using this level of policy. And they basically are making the decisions that the decisions are made by human beings. Which level of change review you want something to go through is something you completely configure, and you have multiple policies, so you divide it up in different ways. A great example of this was one of our customers, the auditors came to them and said, hey, you have to put all your contract records and all of your incentive compensation related records under specialized finance review. So you need finance sign off. Regardless of who asks for the change, finance needs to sign off on these, and so you can create a very special policy that forces that to happen. What these records store is the level of change control, in other words, the change process that you need to go through, and who the approvers would be. And the approvers can be specifically articulated, like in this case, or they would have primary and ending IT approvers, or they can be derived from processes. So you can say this affects this business process, so therefore the approvers are stored there. What that means is when you change your business, you change your staffing, you only need to change the approvers in one place, just on the business process record. And this is not a business process in the sense of a Salesforce business process in the conventional sense. It's just a custom object that stores who the owners of a business process and the approvers of business process would be. And then we can also use it to automate communication to stakeholders. So we can say, when there's a non-conforming change, a change that didn't go through the process, that was in some way skipped over this, we are going to alert the process the owners of the affected processes or the owners of the affected customizations. The usual use case for this is people who own very sensitive reports. If somebody changes something that touches those reports, we would probably like to let them know because they could accidentally not understand the data. Now, this is configurable, doesn't happen automatically because sometimes you do want to do it that way and sometimes you don't. So you can configure it on different policies for different purposes. And then what's going on in the background is StrongPoint is running this test, these sort of tests that we talked about in conformance with your policies that we've helped you set up. And most people have the same sort of default policy, but with your policies, and it's saying, well, what should have gone through change control? And so we can see that these, you can see a bunch of things that actually changed and they didn't have a matching approval. So these can be direct changes in the sense that somebody directly modified something, or they can be indirect. If you remember, that maintenance type field it wasn't the field, it wasn't a workflow that we were looking at that was raising the alarm bells. It was a field that was raising the alarm bells because the field touched scripting and workflows. Well, if somebody then adds another script to the field, it puts the other scripts and workflows at risk. So we're going to get an alert saying that was not a safe thing to do. Now, generally speaking, adding scripting without approval is not a safe thing to do anyway. But and the reason why we're going to alert you to it is that if you didn't properly specify that you were planning to impact that field, then you never looked at the impact analysis of that field, perhaps, and therefore your risk is super high. So it's an auditing system to make sure that things work smoothly and effectively. So look, by no means is this a full scope of what StrongPoint does, but it's a bunch of different strategies that are designed to help us walk through and increase our productivity and reduce the risk of either dealing with or cleaning up technical debt in our organizations, and thereby making ourselves more productive. There are lots of other tools. There's tools, for example, for allowing us to get at detailed information about profiles, or getting at detailed information about users, or detailed information about objects in a way that you can export to Excel and you can take off and go to a meeting there, have a conversation about. If you want a full demonstration of this, by all means, reach out to our team. We'd be happy to walk you through these things. But for now, that's mostly what I wanted to cover. So I'm going to see if we can turn to some questions and see if we can answer any questions for anybody. So can this show integration points? Yes, you can show integration points, and you can. There's multiple different ways to do it. We are increasingly working with the iPaaS providers to provide that integration, and if we and if therefore automatically detecting them, right? But you can also actually if you have, for example, integration points that you're concerned about, you can flag those and upload those as a way of doing it. And then once that information is in the system, it will immediately treat any of the integration points as being just as sensitive, in fact, more sensitive in a way, for scripted solutions. How do I know which SF org this custom field belongs to is another question. Each of your orgs would have its own documentation. So StrongPoint doesn't just document one org, it documents each of the orgs, and we have full environment comparison between them. So so this is really important, for example, when we're going to move forward with a project, either on the entire org or on just a subset, for example, the subset belonging to a particular change project, we can actually compare the environments, making sure that we don't have to do an entire sandbox refresh. We can basically just make sure that the objects are the same as the starting point. And of course, you can use StrongPoint to actually make sure they're the same by actually pushing the customizations from production into a sandbox environment in order for the developer to make sure that they're working with the right starting point. And the following question was, does it support production in all sandboxes? Yes, and also developer orgs as well. Are there any other questions? Those are the questions we got so far. Are there any other questions? No? Well, that works out great because we're sort of coming up on the end of our time together. I hope this is interesting and useful for you. I'm sure that you may have questions about how you would use it. One of the things that we strongly believe is A, this wasn't a demo; it was just a light covering of capabilities. B, nobody should buy this from a demo. We also understand that you're very busy, so we have an entire acceptance program designed to help people resolve whether or not this is a good decision for their company while having full access to our team resources. Because what we want to do is get you moving very, very quickly, very, very effectively. And of course, we've been here many, many times before. So if you're interested in this, the right thing to do is to sit down with our team, talk about what your objectives are, and we'll put together an acceptance plan for you that will ensure that you are using, again, as little time as possible to come to a really great decision, which is what we're all about. All right. So unless there's any other questions, I'll just thank you for your time today. And I look forward to working with some or all of you to improve your efficiency and responsiveness to your company and the stakeholders. Thanks very much.